Here we go again, another disgraceful example of the right-wing media endeavouring to put somebody down for just being themselves. I don't know how many times we see this, but these right-wing pseudo-moral individuals decide that they need to put their pennies worth in when it comes to somebody who actually is just leaving their job, in fact. Now, Grace Tame was put down by the media over the last few days because on Australia Day she snubbed the Prime Minister. I guess she did what many of us wish we could do, and which we will probably do at the next federal election. We will snub him, and that will let him know that he's a meaningless, unempathetic, uninteresting sort of individual. And I guess, in my view, Grace did what we all think, but she kind of did it all in public, I guess. And I think the other thing to remember is that whatever Grace did, she may not have known that it was going to have the impact that it had, because there were so many people who objected to her being Australian of the Year for 2021 anyway. And now that she's snubbed the Prime Minister, because this is a man who doesn't care about anybody else but himself, who's as narcissistic as they come, and a man who clearly should be kicked out of Parliament. So hopefully that is what will be happening really, really soon. But it's interesting to look at the comments that some people have made in relation to this, and I'll bring to light two of them in particular, which I find particularly interesting. And that is, the first one is by, who's this by? This is by Samantha Maiden in The Advertiser. I think both these articles are from The Advertiser. But they kind of put two different perspectives on it, I guess. And so this is the statement that Samantha makes. The backlash against Grace Tame was swift and brutal after she silently paraded her disgust with the Prime Minister for photographers in Canberra, and I guess she had every right to snub him. I mean, the attitude he had towards her at the very beginning, and the behaviour in relation to the abuse, sexual abuse, the harassments and so forth that happened in Parliament, which was really Grace's thing in terms of her confronting those issues and speaking on behalf of women. He disregarded her input into many of those inquiries and other things that took place. And I think Grace was probably pretty disgusted in all of that, and so she had a good reason to be disgusted by this man. On her last days as Australian of the Year, it is tradition that the outgoing winner is invited to the lodge, and it is tradition that the recipient turns up and smiles for the cameras. Well, I want to know what makes that a tradition in the first place. Just because others have done it doesn't mean that the people that follow need to do it as well, particularly when you're really pissed off with the person that's running the event. Grace Tame threw that tradition in the bin on Tuesday, rejecting all the societal rules we've come to expect about how good girls should behave. And I think this was all done in tongue-in-cheek, because I think this writer is probably a little bit more supportive of Grace than what Miranda Devine is, which I'll go to her article in just a moment. The body language was cold, icy and unforgiving, according to journalists. It was childish, rude, immature, partisan, divisive and political, according to critics. "Hello, Grace," the Prime Minister was heard saying. "Good day," she responded. Very Australian. "How are you going? Congratulations on the engagement," Mr Morrison said. "Thank you," Ms Tame replies. "If you listen to the audio without the pictures, it seems innocuous enough, a non-event. However, there were people that wanted to make it an event, because I think at the end of the day, they resent the fact that this lovely young woman has had the role of Australian of the Year in 2021, and she confronted the issues as they were presented, and she expressed her dislike for the Prime Minister and some of the things he did in relation to the inquiries around sexual harassment and abuse within Parliament House, and justifiably so, and good on her, and she needs credit for that. It says here, but the pictures tell a different story. Of course they do. And you got to think that, there might have been moments here where Grace smiled and was jovial and a whole host of other things. However, those pictures aren't all that important and perhaps were not taken, or if taken, were not disclosed to the public, because they wouldn't be telling this story that we're now confronted with. But the pictures tell us a different story. Tame's facial expressions in her own body is a symphony of disgust, is a quote from somebody. The Prime Minister awkwardly recognises he's getting the cold shoulder and tries to smile a bit harder. Typical Scotty sort of response, I guess. She shoots him a dark, dirty look, briefly engages in eye contact with his wife Jenny, and walks off as quickly as she can. On the project, there was a bit of an argument. I could play the audio, I won't bother. And she said there was this heated argument between him and a co-host about what actually happened. He says she was ungracious, rude and childish, refusing to smile for the cameras, barely acknowledges his existence when standing next to him. I don't think I'd really want to acknowledge his existence if I was standing next to him either. Hopefully I'll never have that opportunity. Just be a decent human being, that's all. If that isn't possible, why bother to attend at all? And I just want to say to you, mate, Peter, you could be a decent human being by understanding what this experience might have been like for Grace. But because you're clearly not a decent human being, you couldn't side with her in terms of how the Prime Minister's behaviour has been over the year and how Grace may view him as a result of that. And the other point I want to raise is that we need to acknowledge that Grace has had terrible experience in terms of her own sexual assault and losing her sense of childhood as a teenager because of all of that, and how that has impacted her emotionally and psychologically. Now, the people that criticise her don't realise, I think, that they're just laying further and further abuse upon an already abused person. And anybody with any sense of understanding would know how unkind and how unhealthy that would be. So I want to turn to Miranda Devine's article, and I'll just bring this up if I can. So Miranda Devine. Now, Miranda Devine I find a really fascinating person because she is weird. And she's about as right as you can get, right wing that is, often wrong, but she's about as right wing as you can get. And she wrote an article which I think just indicates who Miranda Devine is. She's a terrible, terrible human being. And for this terrible human being to be criticising another human being, I find quite an interesting idea. What a graceless sourpuss is Grace Tame. Graceless. Isn't that clever of her to use a word like graceless? It really was a cruel double whammy that our sunny, optimistic nation, we're far from optimistic. Miranda lives in the United States, so what in the hell would she know anyway? She's living in the most pathetic nation on earth at the moment, or probably next to Russia. Maybe they do have something in common. Anyway, it really was a cruel double whammy for our sunny. Yeah, what a killjoy at the same time as the pandemic was taking its toll. Yep, that makes it an optimistic nation, given the pandemic and how we're dealing with it. Another story for another day. Thank goodness Grace Tame's days representing Australia are finished, although apparently old Fitzy wants her to be president of his toy republic. Of course he does, and the chances of that happening are Buckley's and none. Who cares? Just one look at Tame's disrespectful favour of the Prime Minister and his wife at the breakfast at the lodge on Tuesday tells you everything you need to know about how foolish it was to elevate such a person in a position of honor. This is an absolute disgusting thing to say about someone. Now, Miranda Devine, I know very little about Miranda's background apart from the fact that she is a terrible human being, which simply comes across from all of her writings and how she talks about other people. But to be able to put someone down in the way that Miranda has about someone she doesn't even know and who cannot appreciate what this young person has been throughout her life, and for some young person to be elevated to the position of Australian of the Year is a fantastic declaration, I think, to acknowledge the value that young people have, and particularly some of the situations that the horrific situations that they've been in. But Miranda, couldn't care about that. Miranda only cares about what's going to sell newspapers. She doesn't have an empathetic bone in the body, and she's a pathetic, absolutely pathetic human being. And we need to... I'm not going to read any more of what she says because it actually disgusts me to think that the human being can say that about another human being and not at all understand what this particular person, Grace, has been through. So I want us to acknowledge that we need to be kinder. Here I am telling people that they're terrible human beings and then asking you to be... Well, I guess some people kind of deserve it. Not that anybody would ever notice what I have to say, but nevertheless, I like to use this opportunity to say it. Miranda Devine, you're disgusting. And that most people should understand that you're not worth listening to, yet people like Grace who have grace, deserve their voices to be heard. Thanks everybody. Look after yourself, take care of yourself, and more importantly, be safe.